Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker here with me today on the precipice of Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals as the Vegas Golden Knights lead the Florida Panthers 2-0. And this is something you called, isn't it, Justin?
Not the 2-0, that's for sure. But I said 6 games. I figured, I honestly saw this probably going, 1-1 for, at least the first 4 games. But man, oh man, it doesn't look like the same Florida team that we expected to show up, I guess. And Bobrovsky, to your point, like in our last show we talked about, hasn't necessarily lost it, but he definitely hasn't helped.
It's like the rest of the team has.
Right.
Bobrovsky may not have lost it, but the rest of the team seems to have. They just aren't playing defensively the way that they had been playing in previous series. They're allowing a ton of opportunities to the slot, which is like that's been their bread and butter, is to not do that. And it's and I think Paul Maurice in his press conference before the finals, they said what's going to be the key, and he said, whoever wins the slot battle is probably going to win this series. And I don't think you have to look further than that Mark Stone goal in Game 1, where he's in the slot, knocks the puck down, doesn't even make a move, and just wires it into the corner. That's winning the slot battle in a way that most people can't. Well, very few guys can do what Mark Stone did on that play.
Gosh, and I wonder if Matthew Tkachuk is going to set an NHL record for most penalty minutes in a finals by the time this is all said and done.
What is the record? Do we know?
I don't know. Let me see if I can Google that really quick.
Yeah, Google that. So I mean, the Stanley Cup Finals have been, I'll say, even in the case of a blowout by the Knights, it has been entertaining. So it's delivered thus far. The Vegas Golden Knights are insanely deep, and the Florida Panthers are really reeling right now, especially with the injury to Louis Sternin and who else is Radko Gudas getting hurt. That's gonna hurt the Panthers with him missing. They just
real quick.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I before I forget. So I did Google it. 103 penalty minutes by Maurice Richard in a Stanley Cup Finals.
Maurice Richard, that's great. And the great thing is, I'll bet you he won like the Hart Trophy that year too.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I don't have the year in front of me. But Radko Gudas, though, I did read today, though, that he came out and said that he is going to be good to go for Game 3.
Oh, he is? Okay. All right. Well,
yep.
Good. I mean, it's the Stanley Cup Finals. A guy like Radko Gudas, I'm sure you pretty much have to cut his leg off in order to stop him from playing in this series. So that's not super surprising. All right. Anything else to say about the finals? I mean, by the time people are listening to this, Game 3 will have likely happened. But anything to just kind of add about what we've seen so far?
Well, first off, I'd like to make a correction. So I actually got it wrong. 103.
Is Game 3 not for? Oh, Game 3 is tomorrow.
It's Thursday. Yeah,
it's tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's Thursday. So just a quick correction. So the 103 penalty minutes is the most ever in total out of a career for Stanley Cup Finals.
Oh, okay. Okay. Not in one Stanley Cup Final, but in he probably won 8 cups or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure he was there quite a few. But so the most ever in one particular Stanley Cup Final series was Mel Bridgman in 1979-1980 season. He had 53 penalty minutes in 6 games. And for reference, so far through 2 games, Matthew Tkachuk has 36.
Okay, yeah. 1 fight and a misconduct, and he wins. Yeah,
exactly.
He'll be there. Well, then in that case, I guess I expect him to win that. I wonder if you look at the penalty minutes he's racked up so far in the playoffs total. I wonder what the record is for most penalty minutes in a single playoff. I would imagine that he's going to come close to that too, because he's also had another game where he had a game misconduct, I think, too. So, you can do the Googling on that if you want. Shall we talk about some of the things going on in the league? Where do we want to start? Do we want to start with this? Mike Babcock?
Why not?
I want to start with Mike. Okay. All right. For those of you, for those of you who just who maybe haven't heard yet and are hearing this for the first time, we are not joking. Mike Babcock is coming back into the NHL. He is going to coach the Columbus Blue Jackets. He has not officially signed the deal. He will not sign the deal until June 30th, when his contract officially ends with Toronto. I guess he wanted to milk that $6 million a year contract for a little longer. He's probably like, well, if I sign a deal with you now, I'm going to make like $50,000 less, $100,000 less this month than I would if I just signed when it's done. And it's probably just easier that way. So anyways, so Mike Babcock goes to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and you're Johnny Gaudreau. What is your first thought?
Oh, I got a tyrant coming in here. Why did I sign? That's my first thought, really. If I'm Johnny Gaudreau, right? I mean, I think, honestly, he came to Columbus, really hoping that, again, that this team was on the verge of, really that he could be that extra piece they needed, right? They were such a tight group, discipline-wise defensively, and so maybe he could be that next piece to take them over the edge, right? And, clearly that was not the case. And I have to imagine now, I mean, right, it almost seems like to me that, Jarmo Kekalainen, he's almost, like this is the last shot, right? Like we brought in guys
100%.
that were quote-unquote players, coaches, right? Because that's, where Johnny Gaudreau comes in at, right? We had John Torts in there. He was not necessarily a player's coach, but, I don't think the players necessarily despised him. Like I think the rumor going around about Mike Babcock is, right, that he was just a tyrant in Toronto, that guys just couldn't stand him. And, it's one thing to have the results, right? Babcock's been to a couple finals. He's got the ring. That's one thing. That's great. A nice little check mark for him. But honestly,
it's why he's getting a second chance.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That is exactly it. That's why he's getting a second chance. But, I think there's just a lack of discipline among these players in Columbus, apparently. And Kekalainen saying, you know what, hey, if Babcock comes in and can't make it work, I don't know what else to do. And, there goes his job. I mean, he's on the hot seat if there ever was a GM that is on the hot seat right now.
Yeah, that is very true. And Johnny Gaudreau may have enhanced that a little bit. Because you go, I mean, he didn't come there because of Kekalainen. He came there because of the city. And maybe if you're ownership, you suddenly go, hey, this is a good place to live. Like, not that they didn't know that, but this is a good place to live. Guys want to come here. I certainly think that with everything that happened with COVID, a lot of American players do not want to be on a Canadian team. A lot of them. So I think they're, and maybe even Europeans too, but definitely American players. And when you consider that, and there's, granted there are 25 American teams, but still that's a team that has $80 million to spend, and they're spending up to the cap now. It's becoming a decent destination for somebody who has like a family. They want to just kind of live a more simple life. Don't want to live in the New Yorks or the LAs. They can go to Columbus, and it can be more of like the suburby kind of vibe. And I think that there's a lot of guys in the league that would appeal to, especially a UFA who's a little bit older and maybe has already had their fun elsewhere.
Yeah, and you have to wonder too, right? I mean, Johnny Gaudreau, like you said, a lot of American guys don't want to go play in Canada. And you know what, I have to wonder too if part of the reason, Johnny Gaudreau also decided to leave was, I don't want to play for this taskmaster and Mr. Sutter over here, who's just the nail driver. And
right.
Gosh, now he.
Granted, he did have his best season ever under him.
True, absolutely true. So but Brad Larson was definitely more of a player's coach, and so maybe that was appealing to Johnny Gaudreau a little bit, right? Things like the personnel and cities and teammates, all that aside, maybe he thought, okay, cool, this could be a coach I could see myself playing for, and is definitely the complete opposite of Daryl Sutter. And now all of a sudden, now he's got another Daryl Sutter 2.0 coming in here, it looks like.
Yeah, on the flip side, I mean, you can't expect to sign an 8-year deal and play under the same coach the entire time. That is highly unlikely.
Absolutely true.
But okay, so let's talk about Mike Babcock for a second, because obviously we know all the rumors, we know all the things that he did to different players, and the whole Marner thing, and who is the hardest working player on the team, and I heard some more about it. I guess he said I don't know who the top one was, but the last player on the list was Tyler Bozak.
Oh,
on Marner's list. And then I guess Babcock took that to these veteran players and told them what he said, and then he went back to Marner and they were like, dude, what the hell? And he's like, he made me do it. And then they went back to Mike Babcock and said, dude, what the hell? And it was just, I think in the end, and Mike Babcock actually apologized for that, which I'll say is probably a rarity. It's not too often you're going to get a guy like Mike Babcock to apologize for something specific like that. He did say that he shouldn't have done it. So, I mean, that's fair. Like, we all do make mistakes. It's douchey. But at the same time, can you not see sitting down with a guy and going, all right, look, who are the guys that are the hardest working players on the team? Like, this is what I'm imagining where it comes from. Like, who's the hardest working player on the team? And like, let's just rank everybody on who the hardest working guys are, all the way down to the least hard working guy. All right, you have them do that. And I don't think that in and of itself is a bad thing. Like, because then you can go emulate these guys, ignore what these guys do because they're lazy, right? Like that's fine. It just goes to a different place when you go and you take that list and you go, guys, look at this. Well, he thinks you're a lazy sack of shit. Like, that's where it goes to the next level. But I mean, I guess it's 5-6 years now. I mean, I did stupid things 5-6 years ago too. I've said stupid things, done stupid things, and I guess everyone gets a second chance. And here's the second chance. You brought up Tortorella a little bit ago. Tortorella, if you remember, I mean, he had a very similar reputation of guys hated him. He was such a hothead. It was just, remember the situation in Vancouver? He was going into the other dressing room. Like, he was just so over the top, so ridiculous, so angry. And he left the game for a little bit and came back. And he was still himself, but he was much more played within the boundaries a little bit. And I think that Babcock will come back. He's been coaching university hockey. So he's been around college players for the last 4 years. And I've got to think that, he's learned, he's spent a lot of time with a lot of young guys. And my hope for Columbus and their fans is that he's a changed person, and that he, maybe the edge is taken off a little bit. And maybe there's a little bit of a humbling, being like, dude, you went from everyone wanting you to now you have to go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. And like, sorry, Columbus, like it isn't the destination of a super high profile coach to go, I'm going to Columbus. Like, Tortorella went there because he was such a mess that Columbus was one of the only teams that would take him at the time. So he goes to Columbus. And I mean, I think both hires were Jarmo Kekalainen, and you wonder if he's just kind of like, well, maybe this is our chance at getting another Tortorella. Somebody who really milked the team and got every ounce of juice out of everyone that he could, and turned them into at least a perennial playoff team that definitely didn't win much, but a perennial playoff team nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, it's it'll be interesting to see. I think now, obviously we hope that Columbus can try to focus this offseason on getting themselves a top line center here with that number 3 pick. That'll obviously be just gold for them if they can get whether it's Leo Carlson or the kid from Michigan, Adam Fentele. Yeah. I think they got between him and, Kent Johnson, I think they could have just some really good centers for Mike Babcock to work with. And And then I got to say too, this Provorov trade, not to transition in there. I don't know if you want to, but
yes, I was like, all right, we're going to transition to the Provorov trade. If we had a producer, he'd be saying that in our ears right now.
Right. I think this is a win for Babcock because I started reading some articles about, Babcock going to Columbus and what people were saying. And, after this trade came out, there was an article in The Athletic that pointed out very clearly. And, I remember from his time in Detroit that Babcock likes to rely heavily on shutdown defensemen. Now, of course, the game has changed a little bit since, Babcock was in Detroit. And, obviously things are a little bit different. You have a lot more speed to the game and stuff like that. But, I mean, I'm sure as yourself as a Maple Leafs fan, you remember his love affair with Ron Hainsey and Polak. And so, I think this Provorov trade, I think this Provorov trade is going to fit that bill for Babcock because now you don't have to rely on Werenski. You lost Gavrikov to LA. They got him re-signed now, and so now you've got a guy who again plays a really good two-way game and can be a shutdown guy for you on your second pairing.
Yeah, I mean it's a really nice acquisition for Columbus. You look at it and from the Flyers' perspective, I think they get a pretty good haul. I mean, they're not worried about the salary cap stuff, so they basically get a first round pick, and they get to get rid of Provorov, who just wasn't fitting anymore. So they get that first, they get that second. They do have to pull in Cal Peterson, but they get Sean Walker, who is, I mean, he was a really nice player for the Kings. He just kind of fell down the depth chart, but I think for Philadelphia, he may be in their top 4. So he'll definitely get an opportunity to play up in the lineup, whereas he wasn't going to get that chance in LA. And then they also get that second round pick from LA as well for taking the Cal Peterson. So I like the haul for Philadelphia. It moves them closer to being bad. They're just going to get a little worse, but they get these draft picks, and it kind of accelerates things. Provorov wouldn't be around for when the Flyers are going to be good again anyways. So I think it's a nice move. And for Columbus, especially getting 30% of that deal retained, he comes in at 4.725. I like the deal. I think that everyone kind of wins. It's I like those kind of deals because, LA actually went and signed Gavrikov just before we started the show. I think 5.8 million somewhere in there is what he signed for a couple years.
2 years. That's a rarity these days for a guy in his prime.
Yeah, a 2-year deal. But so they get to keep Gavrikov, and that kind of has to be included in the deal a little bit, right? Like that is the reason that the Kings made that deal, was so that they could sign Gavrikov, and by making that trade, it's sort of like he's included in there. So a good deal for the LA Kings, I think, as well. But yeah, it does Provorov for 2 more years at 4.725. I'm looking at this from Columbus's perspective, and you're like, all right, so you're trying to win now, obviously, like that's a win now type of trade. But this you're about to have the 3rd overall pick, so you're also not very good. So I am sort of wondering here, what ultimately the Columbus Blue Jackets are trying to do, because they just seem to be a little messy. And I think maybe that's why they're bringing in Babcock, just to go, we're better than we were last year, but we need somebody who can really just grab these guys, tighten up our system, and hold people accountable, which you better believe Mike Babcock will hold people accountable. That seemingly was not happening under the previous coach, and so under Brad Larson. So I think Columbus could be significantly better next year, not just because of this Provorov trade, but because there's going to be a new sheriff in town, we'll say, and I think these players are going to come to play.
Yeah. I mean, you have to assume they're going to be better than they were last year. I mean, I don't think anybody really pegged them to be that bad last year. When it came to your end of the season predictions. So
I think we kind of had Columbus should be sort of in the mix. Probably won't make the playoffs, but be in the mix. And They just were never in any mix. They were in the shit mix. They were down the septic field and they were rotting in the backyard somewhere 30 feet underground. They were bad.
Right. Rotting 30 feet underground. I love that. I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, they were in the shit mix. And so again, one thing I do like, and I'll be very interested to watch this. You mentioned Babcock being a college coach, playing, coaching a lot of these younger guys, right? So that's the mantra with Columbus right now. They've got young guys like Cole Sillinger, Kent Johnson, Kirill, and then of course whomever they take with this number 3 pick here. So they've got young guys now that they really need to bring up. And you wonder if Babcock is the right guy for that, right? Like maybe a guy like Jake Bean, right? You get a little bit more out of him, or you look a little bit further down the line. Maybe they're starting to look at some of these younger guys in the minors and think that maybe Babcock is the right guy to take them to that next step, right? I don't know, but
ultimately, can the Blue Jackets they do armed with $12 million in cap space, and obviously the 3rd overall pick, they can go and they can pick a center and solve some of their issues. Seemingly that center will come and just jump right in, and I'm sure they hope can jump into the lineup based on the projections of all these players in the top 5. But they probably need to go out and sign a centerman, because Boone Jenner as your number 1 center, no offense to Boone Jenner, really like him, but he's not a number 1 center. He probably isn't even a number 2 center on a playoff team, let alone a Stanley Cup winning team. But on a playoff team, you're probably, if there's injuries, he can certainly move up, right? Like if there's injuries, no big deal. He can slide up a little bit, but I think he's best suited as that 3rd line center.
No, I absolutely agree with you.
I he was at one point until they were just forced to throw him up there.
Right. Jack Roslovich obviously didn't really pan out. I think they were hoping he would be that number 2 guy. He kind of, went up and down the lineup at various times. So maybe there's an opportunity for him to slide back up into that 2nd center spot. But for me, what I'd really like to see, I don't know how possible this is. Like you mentioned, that $12 million in cap space. If they could go out and somehow make a move, I don't know, or sign a guy, right? There's not too many high-end centers that are going to be available, right? But maybe you go out and you can convince a guy like Ryan O'Reilly to come play. That's
exactly who I was thinking of.
Right. He would just be ideal for Babcock. I think that he could come in and be a veteran guy to a lot of these younger players, could slide on that number 1 spot, and then you can put, Leo or Adam, you can slide them in that center spot, or, at the number 2 or number 3 spot. And
I just don't think there's any way that Ryan O'Reilly looks at the Blue Jackets' situation and says, "Yeah, they could win. We could win the cup next year." And he's at that age where I don't like. That's what he's going to want.
But maybe you go to like a team.
I could see a Jonathan Taves.
Yeah, that could be possible. But what I was looking at too, some more trade candidates here. Perhaps a guy like Shane Pinto, who was touted to be a top 6 guy, who just needs a change of scenery out of Ottawa right now.
Keeps getting hurt.
I know. Yeah, there is that part of it too, right? But outside of that, really, the only other guy I can think of is maybe JT Compher. Maybe you could try to get him in there, but he's not a number 1. So I don't know. That's boy. We know, Bergeron and Krejci are going to be Boston or retired, and Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be not going back to Columbus. That's for damn sure. The high-end market for centers is very, very thin. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's why it's so difficult to get a center. It's why you pay your center so much money. It's why there's a lot of panic in Toronto about Austin Matthews signing with the Leafs long term, because they don't grow on trees anymore. Like it used to be every year. Some couple big players would become free agents and you'd have a shot at them. But that doesn't happen anymore. It's so rare. It does not happen anymore. And especially because of that extra year that the home team can provide. Mm-hmm. When you're talking to somebody about an extra $10 million, when you're up in that range, it's just hard to compete, because you look at it and you go, in 8 years, am I going to be able to make $10 million again? Like, am I going to sign that deal again? Probably not. So that extra year can really make a difference if the guy's willing to stay. But yeah, it looks like Columbus is going to sign Mike Babcock. So good luck to all in Columbus. Hopefully he's a changed man. Here's what I have not seen yet, and I really want to see. I want someone to go find all those players that used to play for him in university hockey, wherever he coached, somewhere in like wasn't it like Manitoba, somewhere in like that? Oh, somewhere out there where he could hide. I want somebody to track those guys down and go, what was he like as a coach at this level? Like, how did he treat you? And that's something I haven't seen yet. I haven't seen anybody trying to talk to those players. And I would imagine that if somebody treats you terribly and somebody were to call you up and go, hey, we'd like to get an interview, you might not give your name, but you're going to find a way to tell your story. Like, it seems as though anytime somebody's, for lack of a better word, abused in the sports world, it always gets out. So I feel like he probably was on his best behavior knowing he wanted to get back to the NHL. He probably looked around the bus and went, I don't want to be in a bus anymore. I want to be in a plane. I want to be in a jet.
Yep. So he was coaching at the University of Saskatchewan.
That's right. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Manitoba, Saskatchewan.
Close enough.
Yeah. Is that probably in like Regina?
It's freezing cold. That's all I know.
Yes, that's true. Freezing cold in the plains. Okay. Where should we go next? Okay, sorry. Before we leave the Philadelphia Flyers alone, it is kind of out there now that John Gibson has requested a trade from... Oh, sorry. John, not the Flyers. Sorry, the Ducks. John Gibson has requested a trade. This kind of goes in with the Flyers because it seems like Carter Hart is on the table now for the Flyers as well. So with John Gibson out there officially, Carter Hart unofficially, after the Ducks named head coach Greg Cronin, what do we think about the goalie market right now? And what team should have Carter Hart and or John Gibson on their radar? Yeah,
so that's another name, right? Carter Hart, right? So we know Danny Briere, I'll say this. He's done he did a fantastic job with his first ever trade as a GM. And so right now the rumor is Carter Hart's going to be the next trade, right? So if Carter Hart goes, the rebuild is officially on, even though, I mean, everybody kind of suspects it at this point, right? It's kind of out there that like,
dude, they are pulling a Buffalo Sabres where you're like, let's go out and get this, like a goalie that has just been garbage. And we're going to play him 70 games this year and hope that he's really bad, and then watch him just have a bounce back year.
Right.
I mean, I hope he does for his sake. But yeah, it's certainly seems like, especially with just the 1 year left on his deal, under $4 million, seems like this is the perfect time to trade Carter Hart, because does he want to stick around for a long rebuild too? You'd have to ask that question. And so I wonder if this is sort of a mutual parting.
Yeah. So, just looking at teams, right, I think the goaltending market is going to get pretty hot. There's a few big names out there. Gibson, Hart, we know. The other names I can throw out there, Varlamov, Tristan Jarry is going to be the top UFA, I think, coming out of the goalie market right now. And then, of course, you're going to have some other names in there too, but, like Cam Talbot. But, Freddie Anderson, for example. First off, when I look at Carter Hart, the first team that came to mind was the Anaheim Ducks, right? If you're going to lose your franchise goalie and you're going through a rebuild, not necessarily do I think Carter Hart wants to go there, but I think it's a place where Carter Hart could go and be part of that rebuild. Now, necessarily, do I think he's the solution there? No, I think they need to, find somebody else. I think they need to spend a couple more years at the bottom and slowly get guys like, Trevor Zegras, Troy Terry. I think they need to spend, the next 2 or 3 years getting these guys ready to be, able to push for a playoff spot. And so Carter Hart might be a little bit, past his prime, or, might not be willing to wait it out, I guess is the right term for it. Yeah. Beyond that, right, I think one other team that comes to mind, well, two other teams that I think are ready for playoff contention that are going to need goaltenders are the Carolina Hurricanes and Pittsburgh Penguins.
If they don't sign Tristan Jarry.
Right. And it doesn't, I mean, we haven't heard anything on that front.
They did just hire Kyle Dubas.
Right. They just hired Dubas. But
Which
again,
it wouldn't surprise me if he went after someone that we've never heard of, or someone that had struggling season, and just try to patch it up at the goaltending position, because that's what he did for 5 years in Toronto.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, again, assuming Tristan Jarry doesn't re-sign Pittsburgh, they're going to need a goaltender, because he says, that window's not closed. As long as they got Crosby, Malkin, Letang, they're going to be there.
Of course.
So a guy like Gibson, a guy like Hart, I lean more towards Gibson over Hart in Pittsburgh, but I think either one of those goaltenders could be a potential fit if you think that Hart is the guy that can bounce back and be that type of elite goaltender that he was projected to be. Now, Carolina, again, they're another team I think that could really use John Gibson, but at that price, I don't think that's a priority for them right now. They might be more interested in Hart and let a couple of young goaltenders battle it out and see how that goes. But besides those two teams, I think if you want to look elsewhere, you could look at the Buffalo Sabres. Right. Obviously,
definitely. I think Craig Anderson's done. So Yep, they're going to have a big hole to fill there. I
mean, they've got Luukkonen, who looks good, but he's only 24.
Right. Yeah, he played really well in the starts that he had this year. Yep.
Yeah, and so maybe you bring a guy like Gibson in, and now you have that great combo 1A 1B to play with.
Here's where we're talking about the free agent market, and when it comes to look, there's 11 goalies. There's 8 goalies who are UFAs that have won more than 15 games last year. Oh, that's a huge number. I mean, that's a fourth of these teams, at least one B goaltender, winning 16. Aiden Hill won 16, Quick won 16, Talbot won 17, Korpisalo 18, Ranta 19, Anderson 21, and then Jarry 24, Martin Jones 27. I don't know that anybody's trying to bring Martin Jones in as their number one. Even though he won a lot of games, his save percentage was still pretty pitiful. I actually wonder how many more games Seattle might have won if Martin Jones wasn't there. But they just I think Seattle may be on the look for a new goalie too. That's a team that will certainly be looking at least for that 1B to complement what they already have. But with 8 UFA goaltenders who are decently hot on the market, and that doesn't even include Varlamov, who only won 11 games this last year. So tack him onto the list. James Reimer. I mean, there's at least 10 goalies that are UFAs that could make a difference on your team. I mean, even Laurent Brossoit was pretty solid for Vegas. He went 7-0 in the regular season. There are a lot of goalies that have some pedigree. They've played some games. I mean, Alex Nedeljkovic only played 15 games, but does he, could he find a spot somewhere and actually kind of turn this thing around for his career? He had a really rough year this year. He got hurt too. But he wasn't bad the last 2 years before that. He was just on a bad team with the Red Wings. He was great with the Carolina Hurricanes. So, I mean, there are a lot of goalies out there. Are you spending resources to trade for John Gibson or for Carter Hart instead of attempting to bring in any number of these goalies?
Well, that's the question, right? When you said attempt, right? So and the other part is you have to hope that they're available. Right, so we talked about Aiden Hill. The run he's having in Vegas is tremendous, and
I don't think that Aiden Hill is going anywhere. I think he'll re-sign in Vegas.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They've apparently they made an offer to him in March. He wanted to wait till after the season, and I think they're going to do everything they can.
Good move.
Yeah, exactly. Smart play.
I mean, at this point, $5 million for Aiden Hill.
It's possible. I guess it really all depends on where they see Robin Lehner and
maybe 4 if he 4.5 if you take a discount, but you got to look at that Allmark deal as kind of your Allmark. Maybe you're looking at the Carter Hart, but he's a UFA, so you got to think more than what Carter Hart's making at about 4. So
Yeah. And Korpisalo, they're going to find a way to keep him in LA, I think.
Yep.
And, between Anderson and Rata, it wouldn't surprise me if they try to keep one of those guys there.
They already said they wanted to keep both.
Well, yeah, they would. Yeah, right. We talked about that on our last show. We'll
I don't think that they can go looking at what Anderson made for how many games he gives you. Ah, man, it's tough.
Right.
Because he's just hurt. You'd like to get Anderson in at a deal at around $3 million, I think. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know that'll happen, but
I think if you can get some term on Anderson, right, you can keep that cap hit pretty low. That'll be the big
2-year
question,
deal,
I think.
Because he's 34.
Right.
Oh, 33. Sorry, Ranta's 34.
But again, you're gambling that the guy you want is going to be available and he won't go sign with another team versus you spend some assets, right? And the other thing is with goaltenders, the trade value is not super high, right? Of course, we've heard rumblings of Connor Hellebuyck being available.
Now we're talking about somebody I'd spend some resources for.
Right. Now, yeah, exactly, because that's a proven winner, proven Vezina guy. But like, for example, a guy like Jonathan Gibson, who's had a couple down years the last few years, not necessarily, I don't blame him particularly, but, again, I think his value has dropped. And so maybe you could get him for a second and a B-level prospect, maybe you could make that kind of play.
How valuable is John Gibson really? Let's go here. Cal Peterson was basically just given away. Actually, the Kings sort of had to pay to have somebody take away Cal Peterson. Now, he was a $5 million cap hit for one more year, right? One more or two more?
Two more.
Yep. Okay, so $10 million. And John, and yes, he had a bad year. John Gibson has not had a year above a .904 save percentage since 2018-19. So, and it's just basically gotten worse. Like this last year, 8.99 save percentage. I know the Ducks were bad, but the last 4 years, he has been an under-average goaltender. He's making $6.4 million a year for the next 4 years. So now we're talking over $25 million for John Gibson. In my opinion, I want you to pay me to take John Gibson, and I want you to eat salary too.
Oh, no.
I don't think that for me, when I look at this crop of free agents, who would I rather have John Gibson over? Do I want John Gibson over Frederik Andersen? No.
Yep.
Not really.
I do.
Not really. They're the same. But they're the same.
But John Gibson will stay healthy.
That's true. John Gibson will stay healthy, but you have to pay him. You have to pay for him, and you have to pay double the salary, or somewhere around there. Like Cam Talbot. Would I rather have Cam Talbot? I think so.
Nope.
I think I'd take Cam Talbot over John Gibson. Who cares if you're healthy? You're bad.
Well,
he hasn't been good for 5 years.
But here's the thing: you have to.
That's longer than Bobrovsky wasn't good for.
But you have to rely on your scouts and your management team to make the determination. Was John Gibson bad because of the environment, the team he was playing for, or was he bad because he's just not good anymore, right? So that's the question you have to ask. And if you believe that it was just because Anaheim was a terrible team, they had terrible coaching, terrible systems, and it just fell on him to try to carry the team, and he just couldn't rise above that all that weight that was on him there, and you think he can come into a better environment and excel, right? Then it's worth the gamble, because again, I agree with you, just because of the term, the amount of money there that people don't like to spend on goaltenders now, especially in a 1A, 1B market, right? You could probably get him for pretty cheap. So if you think that coming into your system, to your team, he's going to get back to his original form, to where he was a Vezina Canada caliber goaltender. Yeah, 5 years ago.
A long time ago.
Then, spend a third round pick, and you know what? You have to live and die by that, because if he comes in and sucks again, you're not offloading that contract. I can tell you that right now. No one will take another chance at him. So
I would much rather take my shot at Tristan Jarry and pay Tristan Jarry $5 million a year.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I think he's a safer player right now, knowing that you could probably get a guy.
I'd rather have Varlamov.
Well, so here's the flip side about that, right? Varlamov is a safe bet, right? You're going to get a quality goaltender.
He's also not going to get $5 million next year because he's 35 and he only played 23 games.
Right, and that's the other thing too. Now you have to ask yourself from a management standpoint: is John Gibson just worn out because he plays like 70 games every season for Anaheim? So is he just burnt out, right? And so Varlamov, you're going to get a guy who's at least fresh, right? So there's that argument.
Yeah, I just don't think now. If we're talking Carter Hart, we're in a different conversation. Like John Gibson, I think you need to pay me to take him. Carter Hart at 24, at less than $4 million, he's got arbitration rights. So I at least have him for another 2 years. Even on a really bad team, he played pretty decent the last 2 years. I think that I'd be willing to spend some resources on Carter Hart. He would be my target. John Gibson, I'm just looking at this from the standpoint of what domino is going to fall first. I have to think that John Gibson is going to be at least, teams are going to go and try to get Carter Hart first before they try to get John Gibson, right? If you have to choose between the two, you're taking Carter Hart every single day. Do you agree?
I think if I had to choose between the two, I'd rather spend my assets on Carter Hart because he's still young. He's still able to turn it around, right, and get back into where we thought he could be, that elite status goaltender. And
he was he may not be an elite goalie, but I think that he can be an average goalie. He can be an average to above average goalie. He probably isn't going to be a Vezina guy unless he's on a really good team, has a Allmark style year, but I don't need that from my goalie. Just give me somebody who can be solid, can play under some pressure, and the goaltending. Because I don't think that you need that super elite goalie to win. Never have, and I mean you're seeing it right now that you've got Bobrovsky was elite, but he has not been elite. You're seeing how different guys can get hot at different times, and that's just what it is. I think that there's such a fine margin between this goalie is better than this goalie. It's so slim. I think more so at the goaltending position than any other position in hockey. It's just so thin between first best. You do have your maybe top three guys, but after that, number 6 to number 15. Is there a massive difference? No, I don't think there is. But on any given day, those guys can have a hell of a night kind of thing. So it's hard for me to want to spend resources on a goalie when I see so many free agent goaltenders that I think could get the job done.
Yeah, that's the gamble though, right? I mean, do you go out and get the guy you want, or do you just take a gamble and hope the guy you want signs with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see how quickly this turns around here. Does Carter Hart get dealt before the draft, and they seem to be really moving? It's not too often. I don't know. I'm trying to think back to last couple of years, that there's been a trade this big during the Stanley Cup Finals.
Right.
Provorov is a pretty big name, and probably the Philadelphia Flyers' best player was just dealt. So it's interesting that that's happening during the finals. Normally it would happen maybe a week leading up to the draft, but usually it's after the finals are over. So it's interesting to see teams maybe doing this a little bit earlier because they want to be able to figure out what they're going to do at the draft.
Yep, I think just get ahead of it. You don't wait on other teams to beat you to it. So
yeah, absolutely. And so if we'll see what other trades happen before the draft or during maybe during tomorrow's game. We'll just get deals. It'll be happening. All right. We didn't really touch on the Ducks getting a new head coach, but Greg Cronin announced their head coach. Any thoughts on that?
No, to be quite honest, I haven't really looked too far into his history. I know he's been an assistant with the Islanders for a while, and again, he's kind of had as far as
he's been the head coach with AHL Colorado Eagles
Right. But I mean, prior to that, though, his NHL experience was, assistant coaches with the Islanders and Maple Leafs.
Yep. He was with the Leafs when they were, they made the playoffs one time, I think, when he was there, and then they collapsed in Game 7. So,
whoops.
It is he's the 11th head coach in franchise history, and the Ducks have been in existence for, I think, 30 years, right? About 30, almost exactly 30 years.
Almost.
11 coaches in 30 years. That's a lot of coaches, I would say. It's like you're hiring and firing a coach like every 3 years on average. Just something I noticed. Okay, we can. Yeah, the Ducks. Good luck to them. I think you're kind of bringing in somebody who knows how to work with younger players, and that's ultimately what it is, right? Like, it's not a very sexy pick. He's a relative unknown in the NHL from a head coaching standpoint, never coached there, but he's done really well in the AHL. He's shown that he can work with kids and that he can develop players, which is exactly what the Ducks need. Dallas Aikens, I think, was such a technical coach and more the X's and O's kind of stuff that I think that Greg Cronin's going to come in and be a little bit more of a developmental guy for them.
Yeah, and you hope with, Mason McTavish, right, he can take him to the next level. Same with Zegras, and especially when you're going to have that number 2 pick and possibly get Leo Carlsson or Adam Fantilli. You want a coach who can really develop that world talent that I think,
Yes.
Adam or Leo are going to be.
New York Rangers head coaching search is still on, and Peter Laviolette and John Hines appear to be the front runners. Patrick Waugh, not a candidate there, but I think Patrick Waugh is going to pop up somewhere. I don't know where yet, but I think Patrick Waugh is going to pop up at some point here soon, especially after the Quebec Ramparts won the Memorial Cup, and they just trumped all over everybody, and he did a great job coaching them, and I think he's at least paid his dues enough to where teams might be willing to give him another opportunity.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think, Waugh deserves a shot. Actually, to be quite honest, I thought Patrick Waugh was going to be probably the front runner, in my opinion, for the Columbus job, because I thought after Brad Larson that they needed to go back to a disciplined coach, right? Or more or less taskmaster, if you want to call it that. Not that Babcock was really my choice, but I thought Patrick Waugh would have fit that bill very, very well for them. So
yeah, especially after coaching a lot of younger players. Yeah, that's a good vibe there too. I really would, if Sheldon Keefe doesn't survive in Toronto, I'd really like that fit. I'd really like that fit for Patrick Waugh in Toronto. He would take a lot of the brunt, because he'd be fine with the pressure. He loves to win, and that's that's the reason. Like, I feel like the Leafs have been a really good team, but they just haven't been able to get over the hump and win. And who better to come in than the guy who's obsessed with winning? I think it'd be a really good fit.
That's a really good point. I mean, I didn't even really think about that. And I think from a media and fan standpoint, they'd probably be a little bit more patient with Patrick Waugh, knowing the prestige he brings, the Stanley Cup rings, right? I mean, he's been that guy, and not necessarily that he has the coaching, resume that just, is a world beater, but
he did win Coach of the Year in his only year as head coach.
That's true. He's at least got that, but
he was like, "See ya, I told you I could do it. See ya."
Yeah, I got to keep an eye out though for the Calgary Flames. I mean, we haven't heard much on their coaching front, and it wouldn't shock me if he ends up there too. But I have to imagine Patrick Waugh wants. I'm sure he wants a shot at Toronto if Sheldon Keefe doesn't get retained.
Yeah, and we don't know yet whether that is going to happen. We do know that if the Leafs decide to keep Sheldon Keefe, they are going to extend him, so he won't be that lame duck coach. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I have no idea what will happen, but I think Brad Treliving obviously wants to spend time with him and probably pick his brain, figure out where he's at, and if it's my guess is that it hasn't happened yet. I would think that if it was going to happen, it would happen pretty quickly. Would be my guess. Like he said in his press conference, he was going to go visit Austin Matthews. That's out there. But then he also said, the 1B is figuring out the head coach. I got to think that at this point, if it hasn't happened by Friday, like Friday would be the day to be like, we're letting him go. If it hasn't happened by Friday, I would think that he's going to stay, and that they'll say, there's been a lot of change. We think he's a good coach. We want to like kind of unlock him, give him the opportunity to prove himself to the new management. And I think that he could. Like I do think that he is a really good coach, and I think that he could coach to the Stanley Cup Final. Like I think that he's only been a head coach for 4 years, and you can either like if they fire him, he'll go somewhere. He'll get a job. No doubt about it. He's done such a good job turning the Leafs into, honestly, a very good defensive team. Like something that I don't think people thought he would do. They are very well coached. And yes, maybe he's gotten out-coached in certain playoff series, but he's only been a head coach for 4 years. Like, you knew what you were kind of getting when you brought in a coach who had never coached at the NHL level before, that he was going to have some growing pains along the way. And either you let him go now and he gets to go and take all that he's learned and use it for some other team, or you keep him around and you see if he can't continue to get better and continue to improve himself as a head coach. And hopefully the next time he's in the playoffs, he doesn't just win around, but he pushes through and is able to go on a long run. I think it's worth investing in him. I think, especially when I look at what's out there, other than maybe a Patrick Waugh, which is interesting. Don't even know if he would come to Toronto. Not sure, but you gotta also look at what else is out there. And I think that he's probably better than anything that's out there right now.
Yep. And I got to think too, Sheldon Keefe, if he was to, get let go for whatever reason, I got to think he'd probably be brought into a team as an assistant.
Mike Sullivan's assistant in Pittsburgh.
I think he would be brought into a team where
he probably would.
Where you have to imagine that they're already planning to make him the head coach and probably keep their like how Andrew Burnett was brought into New Jersey if it didn't work out right. For example, Ottawa, right? DJ Smith, if he can't turn it around this year, right? Boom. Now you bring in Sheldon Keefe and let him run things just, halfway through the season.
And that's the other thing you got to think is, who are the teams where Sheldon Keefe could go to? Because what if Sheldon Keefe went to Ottawa and then he tortured you for the next 6 years?
Right.
Because now he knows all the tricks. He knows all the players in your team. That's the other thing you got to consider. But I genuinely like him, and I think that the players like him. I think that he's really turned this team into a good structured team, and has lots of buy-in from the players. I think that I echo what Brad Treliving said, where he said, winning is hard. Like, there's a reason why it's very, like, when we all went, wow, the Tampa Bay Lightning are in the finals a third year in a row last year when that happened. It's amazing because it does not happen. Teams do not win multiple years in a row, let alone go to the finals 3 years in a row. Like, it's just so rare. It's so rare that the same teams are back in the conference finals. Like, it is so hard. Look at Vegas is about to win the cup. They missed the playoffs last year with the same team, with better goaltending last year. So it's one of those things where, this year you might not win, and next year you could win it all. And how much do you turn over from the next year to the next year, and how much do you try to just say, let's let these guys go at it again and try to break through and hope we have that year? And I think there's a balance between those two things. I don't think you want to keep beating your head against the wall, but I think there's something to be said about being patient with your group and giving them opportunities. So it's a balance, and it's hard to walk because I think a lot of GMs are trigger happy.
Yep.
They love picking off their coaches, which is, I will say, is one thing that I could appreciate about Kyle Dubas, is that he was like, we're not trying to fire everybody all the time. Like, every time it kind of came up, yes, he fired Babcock, but that was clearly like, Kyle Dubas hated Mike Babcock. You could tell that he hated him, at least from a professional standpoint. Well, he had an easy out with
that one for sure.
Right. Yeah. Easy to fire the douchebag. All right. Anything else that we want to hit before we get out of here?
Oh boy,
Did I miss anything?
I don't think we did really.
I feel like we've talked about everything that's going on.
At least the big stuff.
Well, who do you think is the next trade to go? What's the next deal?
Ooh, the next deal. That's the $1 million question. I have to imagine that Carter Hart is going to be the next piece. I mean, I think, Danny Briere is not wasting any time. He's going to get on it. He's not waiting for the cup to be lifted and hoisted and, skated around the ice. He's going to go ahead and make some moves and, just try to assume as many pieces as possible for the upcoming draft. And I think, if I had to pick something, I'm just going to say it right now. I think Carter Hart's going to end up in Montreal, and that's the next deal that's happening. So,
okay. I was going to the old buyout calendar here, or calculator, because the buyout stuff, they have to be bought out by what's the date? What is the date on the buyout? Isn't it? It's like definitely before July 1st. It's sometime in and around the draft. But I think that the Leafs are going to buy out Matt Murray.
Yeah, the buyout period this year begins no later than June 15th, or 48 hours after the Stanley Cup Final ends, and concludes on June 30th at 5 p.m.
Okay, all right. Okay, so it's between the 15th and the 30th, essentially. So we've got about a week, and maybe sooner when the Stanley Cup Final ends on maybe if it's a sweep, it would be the 10th. So that would mean the 12th is when it could happen. I'm looking at Matt Murray's buyout stuff, and I mean they can lower his cap hit to $687,500, and then $2 million the following year. So a total of $2.6 million kind of spread between two seasons. I got to think that, especially knowing the cap is going to go up in 2024-25 by a pretty significant margin, I have to think that the Leafs go. I mean, there's no reason to keep Matt Murray around at $4.6 million. Just no reason. When you can get, you can get $4 million off your cap, that's an easy goodbye. So I think that he's bought out, and I think maybe with that money you could then re-sign one of Bunting, Kampf, Luke Shen, who I think is certain to be back, and I don't think Ryan O'Reilly's going to be back in Toronto. Unfortunately, I think he was a decent fit, but I think he can still get probably close to $5 million a year somewhere else, and I think that he'll probably chase it. He already has a Stanley Cup. The only way he stays is if he's like, I'm willing to take $3 million a year and I want to win a cup for Toronto kind of thing, which I don't know if he's that sold on that. So
yeah, when it comes to Toronto, I mean, I think Bunting's going to be overvalued in the market, right? People will pay way more than he's worth. People
are going to pay at least $4.5 million. I think,
I'm looking at Zach Hyman money for him for sure. 5 and 5.
I think because he's only had 2 years in the league at this point. I think that's probably gonna drop that a bit. Where Hyman had played 5 years in Toronto, 4 years in Toronto, so a little bit more under his belt. I mean, still okay. Yeah, maybe somewhere between $4 and $5 million. Maybe someone really overpays for him if they think that he can come and play alongside a star player, which clearly he can do. I mean, it is a rarity. And teams paid a lot for like a Chris Kunitz. Those players are very important. You can see how important Hyman is in Edmonton to those top players, and I mean, they're important kind of guys. They don't grow on trees. I guess it's about as close to a Tom Wilson kind of player as you can get. Is a Michael Bunting, Zach Hyman, Tom Wilson. I think they're all somewhere in the same ilk, maybe not in the same level of physicality and body checking, but from that kind of like does the dirty work kind of guy, I think they both fit that bill.
Well, here's the thing, just to add on to that. So when you talk about physicality, right, we live in a copycat league. That's how the NHL has always been. And we're seeing it right now, right? Guys like Ivan Barbashev, the Vegas Golden Knights have played a very physical style of hockey, shutting down the Florida Panthers. And then on the opposite side, Matthew Tkachuk has laid the groundwork for a lot of teams to say, gosh, we need a guy like that, right? And so I think those guys that play...
Just go find a guy like that.
Right. Yeah, so they're obviously not out there, but I think teams are going to overpay.
Start growing them now in your pot.
They're going to give up assets, for guys that can play a more physical brand of hockey. So those Tom Wilsons, those Michael Buntings, they're going to overpay, I think, for those guys because they hope that they're going to turn out
maybe even a Ryan O'Reilly.
Success.
Yeah, maybe this is the perfect time for Ryan O'Reilly to become a free agent, whereas maybe 2 years ago he might not have gotten as much money. All right. Well, I think that'll be a wrap for today, and we will continue following all the trades, everything that's leading up to the draft. We'll do a little bit of a draft show. What is the actual date of the draft? It's always. I'm just gonna Google it here. It is the 28th of June. So we've got exactly 3 weeks from today that we're recording this on the 7th. So. We're pretty close. We'll do a draft preview show and kind of talk a little bit about the picks, but a lot of bit about what we think is going to happen at the draft from a player movement standpoint. That's usually the most fun part about the draft. So we will keep you posted on all that. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Any last thoughts before we get out of here, Justin?
Bye.
Bye.